Hey y'all, thanks so much for being here. My name is Joan Dark. I'm the events coordinator for Bluestockings bookstore and also your moderator for this event. Really excited to have y'all here for the Laziness Does Not Exist event featuring Dr. Devon Price. Um, really appreciate all of y'all taking time out of your day for this. Um, yeah, um, Real quick, if you hadn't heard of Bluestockings before, we are a activist space. We're a anti-capitalist bookstore, feminist bookstore based out of New York City on the Lower East Side. Um, we have been around on the Lower East Side since 1999. Been around for 21 years and excited to be reopening uh, on 116 Suffolk Street, hopefully early this year. I guess that'll be 22 years technically, since it's 2021. um, anyway, I'm not going to take up too much of your time before we get started. Just want to let y'all know. Of course, if y'all have not had a chance to grab this amazing book, Laziness Does Not Exist, you can do so at our Bluestockings web store. The link is being posted in the chat. Um, and if you like what we do and you want to help support Bluestockings, as long as well as, becoming a member of the space and helping us out that way, that really goes a long way. Our monthly members are really helping support the space while we're in this transitionary period. And our members get awesome stuff like exclusive tote bags, pins. We have a Bluestockings book club that folks get a book sent out to them every month. Discounts on our web store. There's all sorts of stuff, and you're helping support a really awesome queer trans run space. So that link is also posted in the chat, and of course, we're also a bookstore, so helping us out in that way definitely helps a lot. Um, yeah, uh, let's go ahead and pass it on over to Dr. Devon Price. Um, yeah, I'll. Dr. Devon Price is going to be reading from their just released book, Laziness Does Not Exist. Devon Price, PhD, is a social psychologist, writer, activist, and professor at Loyola University of Chicago's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. Devon Price.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm just going to read a excerpt of the book that talks about the history of what I call the laziness lie in the book. And the laziness lie, just to kind of orient you before I jump into the reading, is a belief system that basically tells people that they constantly have to worry about themselves being lazy and that we should always be judging other people as lazy. And the laziness lie has three tenets that I talk about in the book. And they are one, that your worth is defined by your productivity. Two, that your feelings of limitations or your needs should be ignored. And three, that there is always more that you could be doing in basically every realm of life. So when I refer to the laziness lie in this bit I'm going to read, that's what I'm talking about, is that kind of belief system. So I'll dive right in. The laziness lie is deeply embedded in the very foundation of the United States. The value of hard work and the evils of sloth are baked into our national myths and our shared value system. Thanks to the legacies of imperialism and slavery, as well as the ongoing influence that the United States exerts on its trade partners, the laziness lie has managed to spread its tendrils into almost every country and culture on the planet. The word lazy first appeared in English in 1540. Even back then, it was used in a judgmental way to mean someone who disliked work or effort. Many etymologists believe it came from either the Middle Low German "laesig," which meant feeble or weak, or from the Old English "lesu," which meant false or evil. These two origins illustrate the odd doublespeak at work whenever we call someone lazy. When we say someone's lazy, we're saying they're incapable of completing a task due to some kind of weakness, but we're also claiming that their lack of ability somehow makes them morally corrupt. It's not that they're tired or even dispirited in some way we might sympathize with. The word implies that they're failures on a fundamental human level. The idea that lazy people are evil fakers who deserve to suffer has been embedded in the word since the very start. One of the major factors that caused the laziness lie to spread throughout the United States was the arrival of the Puritans. The Puritans had long believed that if a person was a hard worker, it was a sign that God had chosen them for salvation. Hard work was believed to improve who you were as a person, and conversely, if a person couldn't focus on the task at hand or couldn't self-motivate, that was a sign that they had already been damned. This meant, of course, that there was no need to feel sympathy for people who struggled or failed to meet their responsibilities. By lacking the drive to succeed, they were displaying to the world that God hadn't chosen them for heaven. When the Puritans came to the colonized United States, their ideas caught on and spread to other, less pious colonists. For many reasons, a belief system that judged and punished the lazy was about to become very popular and politically useful. Colonial America relied on the labor of enslaved people and indentured servants. It was very important to the colony's wealthy and enslaving class that they find a way to motivate enslaved people to work hard, despite the fact that enslaved people had nothing to gain from it. One powerful way to do so was through religious teachings and indoctrination. A productivity-obsessed form of Christianity evolved from the older puritanical idea that work improved moral character, and it was pushed on enslaved people. This form of Christianity taught that suffering was morally righteous and that enslaved people would be rewarded in heaven for being docile, agreeable, and most importantly, diligent. On the flip side, if an enslaved person was slothful or lazy, that meant something was fundamentally corrupt and wrong with them. Enslavers made it a point to keep enslaved people as busy and exhausted as possible out of fear that idle time would give them the means to revolt or riot. Even more disturbing, enslaved people who tried to run away from bondage were seen as mentally ill and described as suffering from runaway slave disorder. By not accepting their proper role in society, they were demonstrating that they were broken and disturbed. This worldview became the foundation for American capitalism. The laziness lie had been born. It would quickly spread to other marginalized people, including indentured servants, poor white laborers, and Native Americans who'd been forced into government boarding schools. These exploited groups were taught that working hard without complaint was virtuous and that desiring free time was morally suspect. As the Industrial Revolution changed the landscape of the country, with more and more Americans working long hours in manufacturing, the laziness lie was pushed even further. The wealthy and highly educated began to claim that poor whites couldn't be trusted with idle time. In fact, too many breaks could make a person antisocial. Propaganda from that time often claimed that if the working poor weren't kept busy, they would resort to crime and drug use, and that society would run amok. Laziness had officially become not only a personal failing, but a social ill to be defeated. And it's remained that way ever since. We can see the dogma of the laziness lie in popular media from that period as well. In the late 1800s, the writer Horatio Alger published numerous stories in which struggling, impoverished characters were able to rise into the upper classes through hard work. The popularity of these books led to the idea that poor people simply needed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they wanted to live a comfortable life. In the 1950s and beyond, evangelical preachers promoted a similar idea with the prosperity doctrine, which claimed that if a person devoted their life to serving Jesus, they would be rewarded with bountiful job opportunities, wealth, and success. In the decades that followed, the laziness lie found its way into countless films, plays, and TV shows. From the national myth of Paul Bunyan and Johnny Appleseed, to the strong, independent cowboys on the silver screen, to the memoirs of entrepreneurs like Conrad Hilton, one of the most prevalent legends in American culture became the tale of the single-minded, hardworking man who had created his own success and changed society through sheer force of will. In these stories, the hero is always a strong white man who doesn't need the support of anyone else. He's usually a bit of a social island with no close connections to other people and a disregard for society's rules in general. In every way, he's the picture of independence. And it's through his strong personality and doggedness that he succeeds. These myths, though appealing to many, carried with them a dark implication. If a person didn't succeed, it's because they weren't doing enough. For people who believe in the laziness lie, things like economic reform, legal protections for workers, and welfare programs seem unnecessary. Those who want to succeed just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Research from the past 3 decades consistently shows that a majority of Americans do, in fact, think this way. For many of us, our first instinct is to generally blame a person for their own misfortune, especially if we can pin that misfortune on laziness. Research also shows that when a person believes this and believes the world is fair and that people get what they deserve, they're less likely to support social welfare and have less sympathy for poor people and their needs. Decades of exposure to the laziness lie has had a massive effect on our public consciousness. It's made many of us critical of other people and quick to blame the victims of economic inequality for their own deprivation. It's made us hate our own limitations, to see our tiredness and our desire for a break as a sign of failure. And it's created an intense internal pressure to keep working harder and harder with no limits and boundaries. The rise of social media and digital work tools have only made these pressures harder to escape. And that's where I'll end the reading portion, but it does go on from there because this is a problem that touches almost every aspect of modern life, basically.
It really does. Yeah. Um, Thank you so much, Devon. I really appreciate that. Um, Again, if you have not had a chance to pick up Laziness Does Not Exist, I heavily encourage you to do so. It's such an amazing book, and really, I think um, one that I can imagine a lot of us need right now. Um, just a reminder that the conversation is being recorded, and we are going to be uploading this to the Bluestockings YouTube after the fact. So, if anyone needs to take a minute, or you have some friends that we're really looking forward to making it today, we're going to have a record of the conversation afterwards as well. Um, yeah. Uh, so, um, and we're also going to have questions going into our conversation later as well. So, if y'all have anything that you want to chime in and ask Devon about, you can just throw that either in the chat or in the Q&A. Um, yeah. So, I think where I want to start, maybe for folks who haven't read the book, Devon, um, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you came into the idea of laziness being this pervasive myth? Because I think you have a really interesting story that is like I I mean, hearing about it, I was listening to you uh, talking on Sam Sanders' show the other day, and just like hearing you retell it, it's just like, wow, this is intense.
Yeah, I had a really intense experience that set me on the path of writing this book, of realizing that playing by the rules that the laziness lie kind of sets out for us, even if you can kind of really meet a lot of society's standards of productivity, which is only a handful of people in the world really can. And for a few years of my life, I was someone who could do that. It doesn't actually bring anything good into your life, and it's not really sustainable. So I was someone who was, in gifted education as a kid, Decided when I was a teenager that I wanted to get a PhD in psychology, very single-minded and driven, and judge my worth by my achievements. And I finished college early. I sped through grad school as fast as I could. And I finished my PhD when I was 25 years old. And I didn't have much of a life other than that. I spent a lot of time by myself just working and exercising, and that was about it. And as soon as I finished my dissertation, within a couple of days, I got really sick. And this fever would come over me every night. It would be like 103-degree fever at like 6 p.m. every night. I could kind of work a little bit during the day, but it would always just hit me. And then I would just be freezing under blankets, and it just wouldn't go away. It continued all the way into the summer. It started in February, continued into the summer. I was freezing under blankets in 90-degree weather. And my family kind of noticed on a family trip, and they were like, this is really weird and scary that you're getting this sick every night. I had all these tests. I had a heart murmur, I had anemia, but there wasn't any diagnosable thing that they could figure out that was causing it. It just came down to I had been working way too fast and way too hard my whole life, and had never really taken it easy or listened to my body. And so, it started in February, went all the way through to about November of that year. And then I finally realized, okay, I need to just stop working, and let my body like heal as much as possible. And then after I did that, I just started noticing how prevalent this was, how other people in my graduate school program, like if they had a depressive episode, people mocked them for being weak. This was a psychology program. Like, we should know better, but we don't. And we talked about our students like they were lazy when most of them were working adults. And I just realized, okay, this is a really pervasive cultural problem, and there's a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I feel like, I can imagine a lot of folks who hear that, they're thinking, wow, they got their PhD at 25. That's like so impressive. Um, and like, not to say that it isn't, to be fair. Um, but also, you know, I think, um, I can only imagine the, you know, amount of stress that you were under, handling all that at the same time. Um, I know a lot of folks, myself included, often, internalize these ideas around laziness and productivity, as value judgments on ourselves. And, we separate ourselves from circumstances around us, like, race, class, able bodied status, mental health, so many different factors. Um, what would you say to try and counter those narratives? Because I can imagine you run into them a lot.
Yeah, people internalize this stuff so hard. And when I hear from the people who say, no, I'm lazy, or I've been told my whole life that I'm lazy and I feel all this shame, um, teaching them and encouraging them to give themselves credit for how much they're actually doing is, I think, a really important place to start on the personal level, at least. So, people with depression, they get told they're lazy by their families, their teachers, their bosses, the culture. And it's so much work to just stay alive when you're super depressed. Your brain is functioning in a really different way. Just something like doing some laundry and taking a shower takes a lot of like frontal lobe functioning that is challenging when you're really depressed. And so you're doing these incredibly exhausting, hard things, and you're just fighting to stay alive, basically. And then people call you lazy. And so learning to give yourself credit for the things that you're struggling and pushing up against, I think is really important. So depression's just one example there, but the complex trauma of being Black in America, of being trans, of really anyone dealing with the fact that we're working longer hours for less money than any other documented time in America's economic history. That alone points to the fact that we're all doing too much. And so I think really recognizing that and saying, hey, I'm actually putting up with a lot. I'm handling more than I should have to handle is the first step on like a personal level to unlearning the idea that you should be ashamed that you're not doing more.
So much. Yeah, I feel like um, as someone who encompasses many of the identities that you just described, I feel like, it's, yeah, there's so much compounding stress and compounding um, work that we have to do just to get through the day, and just because folks who, um, don't have, like, really don't have to work as hard to get through the world, you know, look at everyone else who's struggling, and it's like, it's like you said, this idea surrounding fairness and sort of this assumed understanding that like everyone has a fair shot in the world, that I think is very much like a neoliberal idea that gets pushed a lot here in the U.S. I'm I feel like I'm especially thinking about uh, the conversation on Twitter that just peaked up again about the minimum wage and around thinking about which jobs are worthwhile, and the idea that um, you know you need to be doing a certain type of work to be worth getting a basic kind of living, as if, I mean, $15 an hour isn't even a basic living in so much of the
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah, we've been fighting for 15 for that fight started 10 years ago, so it's not enough anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, I feel like there's a lot of different ways we can talk about how the ideas of laziness extend to different kinds of work. Um, I want to talk this specifically about laziness as this extends to activist work, since we're, that particular kind of space. Um, do you notice any particular threads that stand out more compared to folks who maybe aren't as directly involved in social justice work when we talk about ideas of laziness?
Yeah, I think when we talk about activist fatigue and um, activists feeling lazy or kind of our attitudes towards work and activism being tied up, I think you do have to look at the kind of white supremacy culture idea of how perfectionism and a sense of urgency really taints a lot of how we perceive what we're supposed to be doing and how we evaluate whether we're doing something worthwhile. So in activist spaces, I see a lot of people recognizing that there's this fire that we need to put out. Sometimes it's a literal fire, and the urgency is there in a very real material way. So that makes it even harder than usual to kind of set any kind of healthy boundary. But there's also a little bit of a grandiosity to individual people thinking, I need to be the one to save the world. I need to be the one to change this. And then not thinking about, am I doing what XYZ marginalized group actually wants me to be doing? Am I committing to doing work that is really sustainable and that I can make a consistent commitment to doing? Versus, am I just in a frenzy right now because I've read a bunch of really upsetting news and I want to save a group of people. And so I'm doing things that will feel very superficially good or that will satisfy my need to feel useful, which there's nothing wrong with having those needs. But if all we're doing is trying to just kind of scratch that itch and feel virtuous, that's going to lead us down a bad path a lot of the time. And there are a lot of activist spaces too where there's just aren't a good sense of boundaries around that stuff. So people put a lot of energy into something and it's coming from a very good place, but it's not necessarily putting energy towards the right things or putting pressure on other people in the organization to take on responsibilities that they're not ready for. And that's not how you build kind of a long lasting fight for change or like a coalition of people that are standing in solidarity with each other.
I completely agree. Yeah, I feel like um, one of the best things that I tried to internalize lately in respect to my work is thinking about, um, you know, rest as a commitment to, continuing to do um, the important work that I want to be doing, thinking about, um, you know, well, my ideas around, how we um, I think it's just as important to think about how we work as well as we um, how we rest and take time to make sure we can continue to do that work. You know,
Hmm.
um, I've seen so many different um, activists, burn themselves out just by going so hard and trying to put everything they have into um, you know the the causes they're passionate about, and it really um and I think it can be disheartening too, seeing folks burning out and seeing folks um go through that struggle instead of taking the time they need to um make their work a long lasting effort, because I think that's a lot of what we need right now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a big distinction between staring a huge problem in the face and feeling really hopeless and like there's never an end to the work versus thinking about, again, giving yourself credit for the things you're doing for your community and thinking about what are the small concrete things I'm doing to make one person in my life better, or to help one person in my community who's in need, or to fight for a very small political change where it is something where I'll get a sense of reward and a little bit more faith to kind of keep going. Um, and yeah, I think in a lot of activist spaces, there's a lot of resentment from people who are really burned out. Um, and I think that's a really telling emotion. Anytime we are resenting other people for not doing enough, that means we're doing too much and we're kind of expecting everyone to live to a standard that we're living by that isn't even healthy for us, you know? And the whole, for me at least, like the whole principle of like being a leftist is this idea that all human lives have value and all people deserve to be comfortable. There is no such thing as a human having a debt to society. We are society, you know? So it's about feeling supported and connected to everyone, rather than like, oh, I need to prove that I'm a good person, or oh, I need to save the world. It's, that's a very individualistic way of looking at a social problem, I think.
Yeah, I completely, um I know a lot of and I know I can think of a very specific type of um cis white activist that, is very committed to saving the world regardless of um whether the people that they're trying to save actually want what they're doing. Um and it's just sort of this, some people are just trying to live, and there's this like grandiose idea in their head about what they're trying to do is saving people.
Mhm.
um you talked a little bit around thinking about how these ideas of laziness and activist work have to do with perfectionism, and I think there's a lot to be said about how um, ideas around um, needing a hustle and like this kind of like needing to be working in that sense are entrenched in white supremacist ideals. Who isn't working hard enough, or what kind of work is valuable. Um, and you know, I obviously can't ask you, how are we going to stop this? Because I think it's such a long-winded answer. Um, but I guess when you're working with folks, and when you're talking through these problems, what are a lot of ways that you're seeing to sort of like combat these issues?
Yeah, I definitely see when I'm writing about this stuff, my hope is to kind of always give people a few small concrete things that they can do while kind of getting more and more people on board with the idea that we need really dramatic policy changes to make it so that everyone has the freedom to set real boundaries and to really consent to what work they're doing. We live in a environment where basically everyone is financially coerced into taking on work that they don't necessarily want to be doing. You know, the hatred of laziness and just the nature of how capitalism runs is one that coerces people into just out of sheer fear overcommitting. So it's not as easy as a lot of other self-help books have it of just like learn to stand up for yourself and set work-life boundaries, you know. um, on the micro level, I do tell people to kind of keep track of how they spend their time and give themselves credit for the things they're doing. And in the workplace, start finding ways to build up power with their coworkers, whether that's unionizing, whether that's just starting to trade notes on who's getting paid what amount, who's getting what instructions, and documenting as employees if there's a problem or a pattern that's coming up over and over again so that you can kind of together say, all right, the way work is being divided here is not reasonable. But I also, in these conversations, the big picture stuff that keeps coming up is stuff like UBI, Universal Basic Income. I think obviously in America we have so far to go because people are still turning down their nose at $15 an hour for workers. So slowly moving the needle socially on that is going to be a long project. But I think we are getting to a point where more and more people are realizing this is not sustainable. The amount of work I do doesn't translate to well-being in my life. And I know a lot of people who are working hard who it never paid off for them. So why don't we actually just make sure everyone has a baseline degree of comfort and, you know, fight to give people the freedom to actually decide how they want to spend their lives, because people do want to feel useful. People do want to be productive and creative and interconnected. And so it's not like we actually have to fear that if we give people money, they're going to just not do anything, you know?
Yeah, I feel like, especially in the US, there's this idea that, um, talking about Puritan culture, there's this idea that people have to suffer for what they're doing. It's almost like embedded in. Not almost. It really is in a lot of ways. Um, this idea of suffering, I guess, for what you have, and really needing to do that work, and it really, our ideas of work, are so, like you said, so unsustainable to the point where, all we're doing is thinking about um, how we're working and whether we're um, able to meet our basic needs, um, and if we're, ideally, if we could get past a point where we could have our basic needs met, then I think we could, start conversations about our relationship to work. But, I feel like the groundwork is really, pushing back against these like hyper capitalist ideals of like, you know, devoting everything to work and nothing else.
Yeah, yeah. It's in social psychology, there's this theory, system justification theory, that is kind of the idea that if you manage to succeed or get by in an unfair system, even if that system was stacked against you, you start to kind of justify it, right? Like, oh, well, things were hard, but it turned out okay for me. Maybe obviously it's because I worked hard and was a good person, so we don't need to change the system. It feels comfortable and safe to be in this abusive dynamic that I'm used to, you know, and it's that kind of psychology uh, that happens, unfortunately, to a lot of people who were mistreated in one way or another. They think, well, I'm fine, so this must be fine. Um, so yeah, it's really hard to get people out of that, and it's really upsetting to see people like when they talk about things like forgiving student loan debt. Like,
I was just thinking about this.
yeah, like, oh, well, I suffered to have to pay it back, so I want other people to suffer. Like, it doesn't, like, again, that resentment, it speaks to a pain in that person. Like, actually, let's talk about how you did suffer. And like, let's actually acknowledge that maybe you didn't deserve that. And then maybe you can extend the compassion to other people so that they don't have to. Um, yeah,
I had to pay 20 years for my student loans, so clearly everyone has to.
right.
It's just, it's such a mess. Um, I want to open it up to questions in a bit. But before we do that, I just want to, you talked a little bit about ways that you directly speak to folks who are trying to find ways to dedicate time to themselves, and so um, for folks who are trying to find ways to rest right now, but maybe are having a hard time. Folks who are, I can imagine you get this question a lot, but um, thinking about folks who are trying to dedicate that time right now and maybe are um, can't really see it in front of them. Strategies for that. Well, what would you say to those folks?
Yeah. So, I think most of this advice applies whether someone's looking for more time to rest, or even if it's something like there's something you really care about. You and I, before this started, we were talking about writing. Let's say that there's something creative or something fulfilling that you wish you did have time to work on, but you're so busy with like the grind of staying alive. I think this applies to all of it. You have to start with the assumption that your every minute is already accounted for. You are not wasting time. Every minute of your day is doing something. Even if it's like staring off at the wall, that is your staring off at the wall time. That is meeting some need. Maybe it's not the best way to meet that need. Maybe there's some other thing you can do instead of staring off at the wall. Or maybe what you need is time to stare off at the wall. I don't necessarily know. So keeping track of how you spend your time with this assumption of I'm not going to judge any of this as time wasted. I'm going to use this as a description rather than a prescription, right? Like if I am on my phone for 2 hours a day, I'm on my phone for 2 hours a day. What does that mean? What am I trying to do with that time? And then really looking to see if there's anything in there that the only reason you're doing it is because society says you should be doing it. Um, so for me, a big one in the pandemic was cutting back on exercise. It was so drilled into me. Everybody was so worried about how they needed to worry about whether they were getting enough exercise during the pandemic and staying fit or whatever. And it was something where it was causing me a lot of stress to work, to like tell myself that I should work out every day during the pandemic. I still always find these hidden rules in my head of like what I should be doing when it's actually like something I don't actually care about. So find things in your life to the extent that you can let drop, because you are already doing too much. You are already being asked to be too many things. And so if you want to change anything around, it's not a matter of, oh, I need a better calendar app, or, oh, I need to have more willpower. It's who am I going to disappoint? What am I going to give up on? What do I feel comfortable giving up on? And one way to kind of help make those decisions is another thing that's in the book. It's something called a values clarification exercise, which is just where a person really identifies what are the very most important values in my life. Is it family? Is it creativity? Is it something else? Um, but again, anytime I talk about individual level stuff, I do want to stress I know how limited most people's choices are and how limited their freedom is to move these things around. So giving yourself grace and not beating yourself up for any way that you're spending your time right now, I think is like, you have to start with that as a baseline.
I'm gonna make sure I commit that now when I am rewatching Star Trek again for however many times, I'm committing that time now.
Yeah, yeah. We
Mm-hmm.
often and I think this happens a lot with like doom scrolling, where it's like, well, I don't want to admit to myself that I need a break. I don't want to admit to myself, oh, I want to sit down and play video games for an hour. So instead, I'll open up my phone because I can tell myself I'm just going to stop after I check Instagram for like 1 minute, but I'll probably actually be on there for an amount of time, like scrolling and feeling guilty about it, where I could have just spent that hour doing what I actually wanted to be doing, which might be, whatever, reading,
Mm-hmm.
painting my nails, playing a video game, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like really like owning that can be helpful, I think.
Completely agree. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, we've got room for some questions from our audience here. So, if folks want to chime in either in the Q&A box or in the chat. Um, we can get started there. If folks have anything at all. If not, then uh, we can you can we can just get more time in our day, and we can just you can just uh, wrap up. That is totally fine too. Um, yeah. Um, all right then. I think uh, if that's oh, we got somebody here. Cool. Um, all right then. We got a few folks here chiming in. One of
Awesome.
our questions is, can you talk a little bit about how it was recovering from your burnout to writing an entire book?
Yeah. So after I had my big burnout moment, I had a few years where I really said to myself, I'm not doing any work I'm not getting paid for. Because, when you're in grad school, you're constantly doing work that you're not getting paid for. That's the whole reason we really have graduate students a lot of times, is because they're a cheap labor force, which we'll touch on the next one of the other questions that we have about how to reform academia, but we'll get to that one. Um, so I really, I did some freelance stuff where I knew I could make a decent wage relative to my hours, which again is a huge privilege, obviously, and really kind of tried to keep my living expenses as low as possible, which in the Midwest is more doable than other places. And so I had a few years where it was just like, I'm teaching a few classes. I'm going to find as many online classes as I can find to teach because I know that's less draining for me. And I'm going to, write because it's fun. And that's really how I got into writing online on Medium and places like that, was just because I had decided to like do what I actually liked with my life, which was write things that were not science articles that academics would read, but like blog posts that like my friends would read. Um, so that's part of how this became a book, was because I was just throwing my ideas up online because that was something that was like a fulfilling use of my time, a creative outlet. But then I eventually did get an agent who reached out to me, and we started working on, some of these ideas I had about laziness becoming a book. And I knew I had to be really careful about not falling back into that workaholism disease again. So that was something I worked on really hard with my therapist at the time, who I do mention him a lot in the book, Jason, and really making it a priority to put writing time, a couple hours of writing time at the front of my day, a couple of days a week, and saying like, those might be days where I don't check my email. Those might be days where I really fall behind on grading, and I'll just tell my students like, I will get to your quiz, but it's going to be an extra day. It's not going to be instantaneous. And trying to really only do my writing within those parameters, like within that time that I had set aside, so that it wouldn't become this all-nighter thing. Um, and I am a big proponent of, if you have a job where you have an Outlook calendar, so this is mostly office jobs, which is absolutely not everyone, schedule meetings with yourself to try and like block out time so that no one will encroach on your life as much as possible. So I really stole as much time from my work as I possibly could for writing time, which again, immense privilege, not something that most people have. So I don't want to fail to acknowledge that. Um, And so I think I still probably work too hard on it. It's still a weird paradox where I'm writing this little anti-capitalist thing that a corporation is selling. So I definitely live in those tensions. But I try to remember that I'm doing this because this was my escape hatch from academia. This was the thing that I actually wanted to be doing because it reaches other people and feels meaningful. And there, I can always say no if there's someone that I don't want to talk to about this book who's like a slimy, capitalist or whatever. So, but I'm always navigating that, how to balance that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to point out, I mean, some folks probably already know this, but the before we had Laziness Does Not Exist, the book, I definitely remember reading um, your original Medium article, of the same title. I'm going to link that in here. Um, and definitely thinking about um, those same topics. And, it's something that I know you're still writing about.
Yeah, it never ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, we've got another question here. Any particular recommendation for how academia should be structured differently to get rid of this laziness lie?
Yes. Uh, I'm so glad you asked this because a lot of times I do hear from educators who care about this stuff, who they understand that there are professors and teachers who have really unfair expectations and they don't want to be that person. But us educators, we're in this weird situation where we're both exploited, we're an exploited workforce, and we're people who are causing a lot of stress and workaholism in our students' lives. So we're in this kind of dual role where we're both victim and perpetrator at times. Um, I think uh, it's a huge labor rights issue, a lot of it at the end of the day. Like graduate student workers are workers. They should be legally protected the way workers are. They should have a union to have their back. Here at Loyola, graduate students have been fighting to unionize for a couple of years now. And I think I'm like not supposed to say that I support it, but I always say I support it because it's totally disgusting that they think that I should say otherwise. Because I remember being a grad student worker, and that's a job where you don't have any protection, and your advisors can just leech work out of you endlessly, and it's not even kept track of. So you don't even get overtime. There's like nothing available for you. So I think we really, really need to unionize all instructors and adjuncts. The place where I teach is like 75% adjunct. Um, that's not okay. And unionize our grad students and get rid of some of the administrative positions in most universities, because that's part of what has gotten us into this position where since the 80s, there have been fewer and fewer well-paying tenure track teaching positions and more administrator positions who basically all they do is run different institutes and have meetings about how they're going to get more money by making classes smaller. It's just a really exploitative middle management class. Um, so yeah, so I think those are the structural changes we need to see in academia, centering uh, educators as workers again, and getting rid of all of the like middle management that sucks up all of the money that should be going towards paying people a living wage. And then that would translate to smaller class sizes, more resources for students, and so on and so forth.
I feel like, the fact that um it's almost become like a point of humor, how much grad students are taken advantage of and how much, um, professors are overworked or, can't be bothered to like put in time because they're doing so much, that really, um, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, we have another quick question here. What was your dissertation thesis?
Yeah, my dissertation was about political tolerance. That's what I originally started out studying, and that might be part of why I was so burned out. Free speech attitudes, attitudes towards groups that you disagree with, and how do you persuade people to open up their minds to ideas that they're not interested in hearing, or groups that they're not interested in hearing from. Um, and that was, I defended my dissertation in 2014. So it was getting to be a very depressing political climate. It had been for a very long time, of course, but that's part of why I burnt out, I think.
So sorry you had to you had to do that. Man, um, I can only imagine. Um, we've got another question here. Since I imagine you promoting your book might be related, how do you approach the hustle seemingly imperative in being self-employed or networking and writing papers in academia or otherwise promoting yourself, where it feels like staying in business means you have to respond to a potential client ASAP, be very responsive on social media, etc.?
Oh, I am loving your questions, Megan. Thank you. I think this is one where um, a lot of times we have it so ingrained in us that we do need to be really apologetic, really quick to respond. It's feast or famine when you're a freelancer. You have this mentality of, I need to take every opportunity that comes up. And um, a lot of times, as soon as we start acting a little bit more entitled and like we actually are a really hot commodity that people should be lucky to get to work with, that does kind of start to retrain people's expectations and helps make sure that you get into more of a pattern of working with people that actually are going to compensate you a little bit more fairly. This is hard. It is certainly affected by so many factors, whether someone that is hiring you is going to actually offer you a reasonable wage is certainly tainted by things like racism, transphobia, so many different things. However, I am a big proponent of assume that you're not asking for enough, tack on a few extra $100 to whatever you think is a good rate, round up your hours, scam them. Like, they are going to take advantage of you. So enter with an attitude of, I'm going to exploit the situation for my own well-being, because you're not actually exploiting it. It's just to advocate for yourself in our culture feels bad, So I definitely think of myself as like, what can I get away with? What can I do? How can I get credit for the product itself, because I know what I'm doing is worthwhile, versus proving that I worked hard enough, documenting all these hours and really making it all about how much I suffered. Saying no to people uh, sometimes is the best use of your time. Sometimes being 8 hours, taking 8 hours to reply to an email is a great way to filter out who's actually going to be committed to working with you and actually wants to work with you. Or waiting 2 days, 3 days, a week to reply to an email. It's not the people that are worth working with are usually not actually going to be that demanding. It's the people who are like wanting to exploit you, that want you jumping through hoops instantly. So those things, I think, are all, as my career has progressed, I've gotten more and more adept at saying, like, okay, you want me to write for you? What's your rate? That's not enough. And realizing also, last thing on this, that when you do that stuff, when you are confident, advocate for yourself, ask for more money, you are helping the next person after you that this person hires. You're increasing the amount that they're going to quote the next person that they hire. So you're actually doing something that is a work towards justice, just by treating yourself with some respect.
Coming into freelance work with the confidence of a white man who definitely does not deserve it,
Right.
is one that I think I've definitely adopted in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Um, taking that attitude that so many folks who are privileged take for granted. Um, I think goes a long way. Definitely, like Devon said, taking that time to make sure that you're getting paid exactly what you're worth and then some.
Mm.
Um, we've got another question here, a comment for discussion around how the state places a very heavy burden on people to tough it out in abusively workaholic workplaces and fails to support them if they decide to leave and request unemployment assistance their wages have paid into. Discuss.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have such an approach that any social safety net, which all of our safety nets in the US are suck, they're horrible and very limited. But even what small amount we have, you have to prove in so many ways that you deserve it, that you're not gaming the system, that you're not a faker, that you didn't just quit a job because you're lazy. Um, and it's not just with things like unemployment benefits, things like disability benefits. It's even on a whole other level where you have to really prove every year that you're actually disabled enough to deserve benefits and that you're not this evil faker. And it's like a full-time job just navigating any of these social welfare programs, like, and qualifying for them. And David Graeber is someone who's written a lot of great stuff about this. He has a book, I'll put it in the chat, Utopia of Rules, that's all about how this isn't even like a economically logical way of giving out benefits. Like all of the loopholes and rules that we make people jump through to get benefits, that requires so much work to process that it actually, like, we would save money if we just trusted people and gave them money when they said they needed it. Like that would cost less than having this bureaucracy. But it comes down, I think, to that puritanical thing where we think people have to suffer and prove their suffering to like deserve any grace at all. Oh, and that's rules, not rule. My bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's a great one. Pretty positive we have that on the Webster. I'll see if I can't link to that after our next question. Um, in a similar vein, how can we advocate for people who cannot work the 40-hour work week? I have found that with my learning disability, I simply cannot work 40 hours, do chores, and take care of myself. I would want to do more of myself, but found my time and energy so limited.
Yeah, I think when having those conversations, thinking about who you can reach and who's worthwhile to try and reach is really important, because you do really need to preserve your energy. As someone in that situation, I think a lot of people, anybody who's like a spoonie, so like chronic illness people, people with ADHD, anyone who can't really, work a 40-hour week, really, like, you probably have a lot of people who are giving you a lot of judgment all the time. So like, which family members can you kind of explain or send a book to or an article to that will help them understand why this isn't just willpower, versus who are the people that are never going to listen to you about that stuff and never going to respect you on that stuff? Like, their hearts are not open to it yet, at least, because sometimes you can't make someone understand if they're not ready to understand and empathize. So I don't want that to be another thing that people feel pressure about, like changing hearts and minds. But I think when you're not talking about yourself, it can be easier to just model, like, reflecting, like, curiously. Like, if you hear someone in your life say, oh, my lazy coworker is always leaving all this work for me, he's so blah blah blah, like, just kind of reflecting, like, oh, I wonder, like, if he's going through anything, or, oh, that job that he's doing sounds really hard and really detail oriented, does he have anyone to like look over his work to help with how like detailed it is, or is it just kind of all falling to you because the job isn't set up right, like, kind of reflectively modeling, like thinking about, oh, is there maybe an external reason why this person's disappointing you? That can kind of help. That's certainly what I do with my coworkers when they complain about their students. Like, oh, it sounds like that student's actually going through a really hard time. That must be really hard. I know you're annoyed by all their emails, but like, and that sucks too, but like, like, just try to encourage a little bit of that moving past your knee-jerk response to things. But it's hard. You can't force it until someone's kind of ready.
I always wonder, sort of like, because I definitely feel like thinking about, um, I definitely know folks in my life that have this understanding that they themselves work so hard and that they need time for themselves, but really don't feel like they want to extend that empathy to other folks and just can't understand that there is a world outside of themselves in which other people are struggling. Um, and it's really hard to break through that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a hard conversation, especially because a lot of those people, it's like they think, oh, I'm the one in the household making all the money, so I must be the person working the hardest. And it's like, well, think about all the other, you don't even recognize how much the other people around you are supporting you and making your life possible because it's not, it's work that doesn't bring money in, it's like undervalued,
Mm-hmm.
often very gendered labor and all of that stuff.
Oh, so much. Yeah. Um, I feel like we touched on this a little bit, but I think it might be a good question for us to wrap on um, in terms of managing your time when you're writing a book and reteaching yourself to rest at the same time.
Um, so one element of it that we haven't touched on enough, I think, is learning to listen to your body and your emotions from a position of this is really important data instead of judgment and trying to argue with, oh, I don't deserve a break right now. It doesn't make sense that I'm tired. And part of my approach to this almost comes from the eating disorder recovery kind of world and intuitive eating, and like the fat liberation movement. This idea that um, for a lot of us, and this isn't just eating disorder people, this is also people who are workaholics in various ways. You feel something and your immediate instinct is to say, why do I feel that way? I've only worked 2 hours. Why am I tired? I still need to do XYZ. I don't have a good enough reason to feel this way. It's not logical that I feel this emotion. And so I'm going to stifle it or be mad at myself for having it. And it's really just frayed our ability to actually like really consent to things, and really listen to our actual needs. And it just puts us on the path to burnout so quickly. So practicing noticing emotions and feelings in your body, annoyance, resentment, wanting to go play a video game, not being able to pay attention as you're trying to read a book, instead of like beating yourself up for lacking focus, noticing that feeling and saying, okay, that feeling's actually my friend and it's trying to tell me something. It's part of my body and my mind's warning system. And so instead of picking apart why I don't deserve to feel this way or it's irrational or it makes me bad, I'm just going to say like, thank you to my body for warning me. And I'm going to listen to that and actually go do something different, or take a break. And that is a really long process, but I think that's often where a lot of this stuff starts because we just have it so drilled into us that all of those things make us bad and weak and lazy when actually those things keep us alive.
So true. Yeah, I think um, there's so much we can gain by just listening to our bodies right now. Um, Devon, I really want to thank you again for joining me for this conversation. This was such a wonderful time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Nora and Shirley and Corey, for helping make this possible too.
Yeah, thank you again to our ASL interpreters, Shirley and Nora, who are handling accessibility on their end for this conversation, and Corey, who's our person running captioning at the moment. Um, if at this point you have not already been convinced and have bought this book for yourself, I would again highly recommend the amazing book Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price. It's such an important book, especially at this time when so many of us are stuck at home and having to just really try and find that time for our work life balance right now. Um, yeah. Um, if you want to find more of Devon's writing on top of that, I believe it's just devonprice.medium.com.
Yeah.
Yep, that's so we've got that there for y'all to check out. Um, and then if y'all feel so inclined, of course, Bluestockings is a bookstore as we're trying to be through this entire time. If y'all feel so inclined to grab some other books for yourself to help further your radical education, or grab some stuff for uh, a loved one, definitely appreciate it. And you can support us by becoming a monthly Bluestockings member over at withfriends.co/bluestockings/join. That's going to go in the chat too. Um, yeah, thank you all so much for joining us.